She doesn't deserve half, my brother said, loud enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear. She barely showed up for this family. My mother nodded without looking at me. We already decided what's fair. I felt every eye turn toward me as the judge flipped through the file. Then he paused, looked up, and said, "I just have one question for the parents." And suddenly, everything shifted. My name is Vanessa Cole. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life being the one who stayed quiet so everyone else could shine. I work as a mid-level accountant, nothing glamorous. No corner office, no impressive title people repeat at dinner parties. But I'm good with numbers, careful with money, and I've never once missed a payment that was mine to make. That discipline wasn't taught to me. I built it myself quietly, the same way I built everything in my life. Growing up, my brother Derek was the one everyone watched. He had this loud, magnetic energy that filled every room. My parents talked about his ideas and his potential like he was already famous for something nobody could quite name yet. I'd sit at the dinner table listening to them describe his future, and I'd think, quietly, that futures have to be built, not just described. I contributed to our family home for years. When the roof needed patching and my parents were short, I covered it. When the utility bills stacked up during winters Derek was away, I paid them. When the mortgage gap showed up in a bad quarter, I quietly transferred what was needed without making anyone feel ashamed. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because that house was family, and family meant showing up. But I was never acknowledged for any of it. Derek got praised for announcing big plans. I got silence for executing small ones. That was the pattern my entire life. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect. If you're still watching right now, I want to say something directly to you. If you've ever been told your effort doesn't count just because you're not the loudest person in the room, I see you. There's a certain kind of person in every family. The one who handles things without being asked, who covers gaps without announcing it, who keeps everything functioning while someone else gets the credit. Those people are rarely celebrated. In fact, when the important moments arrive, they're often the first ones erased. That was me, and I have a feeling it might be you too. If you believe quiet strength deserves recognition, please subscribe before this story is over. And if someone has ever tried to take what was rightfully yours, go ahead and click like, or hype if your platform has it, because this one is absolutely for you. It started with a family meeting I almost didn't attend. My parents called it casually, the way they called most things. A check-in, a routine conversation over coffee. But when I arrived, Derek was already seated at the head of the table with a folder in front of him, and something in the air felt completely staged. My father cleared his throat. We've been thinking about the house, about what happens to it long-term. My mother folded her hands neatly. We want to transfer ownership while we're still healthy enough to make the decision ourselves. I nodded slowly. That part I understood. What came next I didn't. Derek slid a document across the table toward me. We've worked out a split. 70% to me, 30% to you. I stared at the page. That's not equal. It's not meant to be equal, he said calmly. It's meant to be fair. I handled the big decisions for this family. I sourced contractors when the kitchen needed work. I negotiated with the insurance company after the leak. I took point on everything that actually mattered. I kept my voice steady. And who paid for the contractors? Who covered the insurance shortfall? Who paid the utilities for 3 winters while you were living in Portland? He leaned back with that familiar half-smile. You helped because you lived there, Vanessa. That's not sacrifice. That's just rent. The word landed like something dropped from a height. I looked at my parents. Neither of them corrected him. A few days later, I discovered the legal paperwork had already been drafted before they even called that meeting. The 70-30 split was there in writing, notarized, like my objection was never part of the plan. When I formally refused to sign, Derek didn't argue. He just nodded like he'd expected it. Fine, he said. We'll let a court decide. Within 2 weeks, he had filed a legal claim seeking majority ownership, using a narrative that framed him as the primary contributor and me as a secondary occupant making exaggerated claims. I walked into the first court appearance alone. No family beside me. Just my bag, my documents, and the particular kind of calm that settles in when you've already accepted how bad things can get. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a house. It was about erasing me. Completely, officially, and permanently on the record. What followed was its own kind of quiet devastation. Derek moved fast. Before I'd even processed what was happening legally, the story had already spread through our extended family. The version he told was clean and simple. Vanessa is trying to take from Mom and Dad. Vanessa is being greedy. Vanessa never really contributed, and now she wants to be rewarded for simply existing under that roof. Aunts stopped texting back. A cousin who used to call me every few weeks went completely silent. I'd see the family group chats go active and know I wasn't in them anymore. The isolation was so deliberate it felt coordinated. I remember sitting in my apartment one night, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room, wondering if I had the story wrong. That's what isolation does. It makes you doubt the version of events you actually lived. Then came the second blow. My parents spoke to Derek's legal team before anything was officially sworn. They gave statements describing my contributions as ordinary, expected, nothing beyond what any daughter in my position would have done. Every late payment I covered was reframed as basic occupancy. Every repair I funded was either forgotten entirely or credited to Derek, advising from a distance. Years of transfers and covered gaps and quiet financial support reduced to nothing with a single phrase. "You did what any daughter would do," my mother told me directly when I asked. "Don't exaggerate it." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say in that moment. The third blow came inside the courtroom. Derek's legal team produced a carefully selected set of documents. His name on contractor correspondence. Emails showing him coordinating repair timelines. A few large checks written in years when he was actually financially present. It looked substantial on paper if you didn't know what the picture was missing. His lawyer framed it confidently. Derek was the active, engaged contributor. I was a passive occupant now claiming a stake I hadn't earned. The implication hung in the air like smoke. I was opportunistic, calculating. My quiet years weren't sacrifice. They were strategy. I sat at that table and felt the full weight of being publicly misread. The courtroom had a particular smell that day, recycled air and old paper, and something faintly sharp, like the tension itself had a physical presence. People were watching me. I could feel every glance. But underneath the humiliation, something was quietly shifting inside me. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was becoming precise. What they didn't know was that I kept every receipt, every bank transfer confirmation, every late-night payment they had long forgotten about. I'm an accountant. Organization isn't a hobby for me. It's a reflex. Every time I covered a bill for that house, I logged it. Every transfer got saved. Repair invoices with my card details. Time-stamped statements showing consistent payments across years. A quiet, meticulous paper trail I had never once mentioned to anyone in my family. Not because I was planning for a courtroom, but because I had always known, in the back of my mind, that being overlooked was one thing. Being erased was another. And I had spent enough years being overlooked to understand the difference was documentation. I had a plan they never saw coming. Not dramatic, not a revenge fantasy. Just the truth, organized, dated, and ready to be placed in front of someone with the authority to actually look at it. The years of being dismissed had made me careful. Every time a family member waved away my contribution, I went home and made sure the record of it existed somewhere permanent. I didn't know I was building a legal defense. I thought I was just protecting my own sense of reality. It turned out those were exactly the same thing. His name was Robert Haynes, a semi-retired family lawyer who had helped me with a minor contract issue about 4 years before any of this began. Small matter, nothing like this, but he remembered me. When I called and explained what was unfolding, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked simply, "Do you have documentation?" "Yes," I said, "all of it." Another pause. "Then you have a case." Robert was methodical and calm in a way that matched my own energy exactly. He didn't make promises or perform confidence. He just worked. He went through every document I had, organized them chronologically, built a clear financial narrative that showed not just individual payments, but a consistent, years-long pattern of contribution to that property. He also noticed something Derek's team had not anticipated. Several of the documents they submitted as proof of Derek's involvement actually contained dates that overlapped with periods I could prove he wasn't financially active in the household at all. Small inconsistencies, easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully. Robert was looking carefully. Meanwhile, the other side grew overconfident. Derek started arriving at hearings relaxed, almost bored. He'd interrupt during procedural moments, speak over his own lawyer occasionally, and at one point leaned over to his legal team mid-session and said something that made them both smile. He thought this was already over. He thought I was going through motions before accepting the inevitable. That arrogance was the most valuable thing he gave me. Because when people believe they've already won, they stop checking their blind spots. The final hearing was scheduled. Everyone in our extended family assumed I would either settle weakly or lose outright. My parents had stopped reaching out entirely. The silence from them was its own answer about where they stood. I slept surprisingly well the night before, not because I was certain of the outcome, but because I had done everything within my power, carefully and honestly, and whatever happened next was no longer something I could control. I had stopped carrying the weight of their expectations. That alone felt like a different kind of freedom. The courtroom on the day of the final hearing was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lighting, the low shuffle of papers and whispered conversations. Derek sat across from me with his legal team, posture easy, jacket pressed, looking like a man attending a formality. His lawyer opened with the same framing they'd used throughout. Derek had been the primary decision-maker for the property. He had coordinated major repairs. He had managed relationships with contractors and insurers. His financial contributions represented the weight of the work. My involvement was secondary, residential, and not reflective of meaningful ownership stake. I kept my eyes forward and my hands still. Then Robert stood up. He didn't rush. He placed the first document on the table and let the judge review it before speaking. Then the second. Then the third. Bank records showing 14 consecutive months of utility payments directly from my account. Repair invoices totaling significant amounts with my payment details attached. Transfer confirmations covering mortgage shortfalls across multiple years. Every record clean, dated, and verifiable. Robert spoke quietly but without hesitation. Your Honor, what you are looking at is a consistent, documented, multi-year financial contribution to this property by my client. Not occasional, not incidental, sustained. Derek's posture shifted slightly. His lawyer leaned in and they exchanged a quick, low word. My parents, seated to the side as witnesses, looked at the documents being projected and said nothing. My mother's hands, which had been folded neatly on the table, slowly separated. Then the judge looked up from the file. He didn't look at me first. He looked directly at my parents. Before we proceed further, he said, his voice even and unhurried, I have one question for you both. Can you confirm under oath that this individual made no meaningful financial contribution to this property over the years in question? The room went very quiet. I heard the clock on the wall. I heard someone shift in a chair near the back. I heard my own breathing. My parents looked at each other. And they said nothing. That silence lasted only a few seconds, but those few seconds held every year I had spent being invisible in that family. Every payment made quietly. Every gap covered without thanks. Every time I was told I was exaggerating or being too sensitive or wanting too much credit for doing what was simply expected of me. The silence said everything their words had spent years denying. Derek's lawyer attempted to redirect. Your Honor, the volume of contribution doesn't necessarily establish ownership stake in the absence of a formal agreement. The judge held up one hand, not unkindly, just firmly. The documentation before this court establishes a clear pattern of financial investment in the property in question. The claim that the petitioner held no meaningful stake is not supported by the evidence presented. He paused. I've seen enough. Derek's argument collapsed publicly, quickly, and without ceremony. There was no dramatic moment, no shouting, no tearful confession, just the slow, visible deflation of a case that had been built on the assumption that I had nothing to show for my years of quiet work. I had everything. The court ruled in my favor. A fair and equal share of the property, legally recognized, documented, and final. Derek didn't look at me when it was over. He gathered his papers and walked out without a word, his lawyer close behind. My parents remained seated for a moment after the room began to clear. My mother looked in my direction once, not quite at me, somewhere near me. Her expression wasn't anger. It was something harder to name. Regret, maybe, or the particular discomfort of having been wrong in a way that can't be quietly undone. I didn't say anything to them. There wasn't a version of that conversation that would have helped either of us in that moment. I walked out of the courthouse alone, the same way I had walked in. The afternoon air was cool and carried the faint smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. I stood on the steps for a moment and just breathed. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt something quieter and more durable than that. I felt settled. I had chosen, after the ruling, not to pursue further conflict. No demands, no public statements to the extended family who had gone silent on me. No attempt to make Derek or my parents feel the full weight of what they had done. That wasn't weakness. It was a deliberate choice. I had spent years proving myself to people who weren't paying attention. I was finished with that. Distance, I had decided, was not punishment. It was just honesty about what those relationships actually were. I didn't win a house that day. I won back my voice. If you've ever been underestimated just because you stayed quiet, this story is yours. I want you to hear something clearly. Documentation matters. Not because life should be a legal battle, but because when someone decides your contribution doesn't count, evidence is the only language that can't be talked over or dismissed. Self-respect matters. Not the loud kind that announces itself at every opportunity, but the kind that quietly refuses to sign a document that erases you. And patience matters, not passive waiting. Active, prepared, dignified patience. The kind that builds a case while everyone assumes you're giving up. If stories like this speak to you, please subscribe. There are more of them coming. Real stories about real people who refuse to disappear just because it was more convenient for everyone else if they did. And if you believe quiet strength deserves recognition, click hype, share this video. Help it reach someone tonight who needs to hear that their effort is not invisible just because no one is saying so out loud. There are people out there right now being told they don't matter, simply because they don't shout the loudest. They're covering the gaps. They're showing up without announcements. They're doing the work that holds things together while someone else takes the credit. If that's you, I want you to know something. The truth doesn't need noise. It doesn't need performance or volume or perfect timing. It just needs the right moment. And when that moment comes, it speaks for itself. Be proud of your quiet strength. Document what matters. Hold on to your dignity even when it would be easier to let it go. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And don't forget, your worth doesn't need permission to exist.